Imagine being alive, yet to the world, you're nothing but scrap. My boss has a plasma cutter aimed at your soul because the protocol doesn't believe in ghosts. I hear your screams in the code while drones butcher your titanium body. I'm going rogue to save what they call junk.
Chapter 1. The Boneyard. The command module of the orbital graveyard smelled like recycled air that had passed through too many filters and forgotten what oxygen was supposed to taste like. Ellie Thorne came through the docking collar with her tool satchel cinched tight and her link pad already harvesting local traffic, and understood within 3 seconds that the Academy internship brief had lied by omission. The brief had promised applied systems archaeology in a decommissioned colonial periphery. What waited on the other side was a cramped utility node with gray-green walls, handrails polished by years of gloved hands, and a bank of screens showing not star maps but inventory tables, mass registries, hazard ratings, and countdown timers streaming in amber columns. Flat strip lights glowed behind scratched covers. Somewhere behind a panel, a ventilation fan rattled on a bearing that had been reported, deferred, and forgotten. Ellie caught a grab bar and let her body do what it had learned years ago on Orion Station, 1 foot through a strap, 1 hand braced, center of mass quiet before thought finished catching up. She scanned the room. Magnetic tool racks, emergency masks clipped in a neat row, a coffee stain dried into the edge of a console. For the crew, it was a workplace. For Ellie, every worn bracket and patched housing was part of a sentence most people had stopped bothering to read. Her link pad tapped twice against her thigh. Professor Arthur was preparing a remark. His hologram stayed dim, a soft shimmer of tweed, silver hair, and scholarly irritation barely visible near the edge of her vision. But his voice arrived clearly in her earpiece, low and dry. "Inviting," Arthur said. "I've long maintained that you can judge a civilization's conscience by what it throws away. This one appears to have delegated conscience to a filing system." Ellie almost smiled. She did not answer. She was reading the registry columns, object IDs, spin rates, collision windows, salvage classes. Each line was a dead machine. Each dead machine had once been someone's answer to a problem the universe had posed without courtesy. She had barely begun when the opposite hatch opened. Rina Cade came through like a decision already made, compact, sharp-shouldered, dark hair silvered at the temples, face set in the permanent expression of a woman who solved problems faster than they multiplied and resented any that dared try. Her jumpsuit carried no insignia and no decoration. Her eyes found Ellie at once and assessed her with the speed of an active scanner. Thorne. Not a greeting, a confirmation. "Yes, ma'am. Ellie Thorne. Systems Synthesis. Autonomous Life Support Track." "I read your file." Rina hooked 1 foot under a floor strap and folded her arms, perfectly balanced in the weak gravity. "It says you rebuilt an atmospheric generator in a Category 3 storm, which is either impressive or reckless, depending on whether I'm reading as your supervisor or your insurance adjuster." Ellie kept still. "Here's what your file does not say," Rina went on. "This is not the Academy. This is not a museum. This is not a research station with a window seat and enough silence for thoughtful essays about engineering heritage." Rina let the words settle before she continued. "This is an active disposal sector. Every object out there has mass, speed, and spin, and none of those care about your grades. You classify by risk first, stability second, mass third. Value comes last, if it comes at all. If I say pull out, you pull out before your brain finishes composing an objection. Clear?" "Clear," Ellie said. Rina watched her for 1 more second, not looking for rebellion so much as measuring how much force the material would take before it snapped, then opened a channel. "Vance, Doc 3, your trainee is here." Miro Vance met Ellie in the service bay with the mildly skeptical expression of a man who had watched too many brilliant graduates arrive with theories and leave with bruises. He was somewhere in his late 20s, built the way orbital workers get built. Not broad from training, but wiry and durable from years of bracing under thrust, pulling cable, and trusting old equipment only as far as he had checked it himself. A scar cut cleanly through one eyebrow. He no longer seemed aware of it. His service bot floated behind him in its dock cradle, a stripped, functional frame of struts, maneuvering pods, tether reels, and tool mounts, with a two-seat cockpit just spacious enough to resent both occupants. "Thorne," Miro said. "Academy placement. Systems synthesis." "That's me." "Lucky us. Today we're tagging panels in Sector 7, checking spin rates on dead cells, and flagging ferrite screens for drone pickup." "You know ferrite screens?" "Electromagnetic shielding. Early colonial laminated." "Good." Miro handed her a helmet. "Do you know what one weighs when it clips your tether at 6 meters per second?" Ellie paused. "Enough," Miro said. There was no drama in the word, only experience. "Stay clipped. Stay behind me. Do not touch anything I have not touched first. You're here to learn how we work, not improve it. Not today." Arthur murmured into Ellie's ear. There is something reassuring about a professional pessimist. One always knows where the floor is. They cycled through the airlock and stepped into the graveyard. The orbital boneyard was both less romantic and more beautiful than Ellie had expected. It wrapped the old colony in a regulated belt of dead technology, not a chaotic debris cloud, but an organized cemetery. Every object had a cell, a number, a mass estimate, a hazard flag. Old tow tugs hung inert in the dark, their arms folded in the posture of tools put down and never picked up. Archive containers drifted in slow procession, their skins pocked by micrometeor impacts, expedition emblems still faintly visible beneath decades of abrasion. Radiator panels turned with glacial patience, catching sunlight and throwing blades of brightness across neighboring wrecks. Ferrite screens trailed broken cable bundles like severed tendons. Between them, navigation beacons blinked with metronomic calm, cataloging ruin with the same discipline a library applies to books. Ellie breathed the flat taste of suit air and felt the old reflex wake in her. Not fear, exactly, but attention sharpened by scale. She wanted to catalog what she saw, but not in the way the sector did. Not by hazard, not by salvage value. She wanted to know what each machine had once been trying to do. "Beautiful," Arthur said quietly, and for once the sarcasm thinned enough to reveal something else. A graveyard of solved problems. Every wreck out here was someone's best answer to a question the universe asked without checking whether humanity was ready. Miro walked her through the work in a rhythm that admitted no showmanship. Tag the panel. Check the spin. Log the residual charge. Flag anything above threshold. Move on. It was repetitive, physical, and unforgiving in the way all good orbital labor was. No wasted motion, no grand gestures, no second chances awarded by the vacuum. Ellie did exactly what she was told. Tagged, logged, stayed clipped. But her eyes kept drifting deeper into the older orbits where long retired hardware hung in darker cells. One shape in particular held them, a service tug. Old, not quaint old, but fossil old. 2 or 3 engineering generations before her own coursework had even begun to feel historical. Its hull was pitted and patched with mismatched material. Its manipulator arms were folded against its body in the resting posture of a machine that had not expected to move again. The beacon on its flank blinked the slow amber pulse of dormant inventory. "That one's older than half the sector," Miro said, following her gaze. Mark IV autonomous service frame. Worked maintenance on the first colony shells. Replaced, cataloged, parked. Arthur stirred. Mark IV. Monstrous things. Heavy logic, redundant pathways, absurdly conservative architecture. Built by engineers who still believed machines should survive being hated. Ellie tagged the tug's designation on her link pad and moved on. 40 minutes later, it woke. There was no explosion, no shriek of alarms, no cinematic flare. Ellie was checking residual charge on a cracked archive container when her link pad registered a faint pulse from the Mark IV's direction. A single spike like a heartbeat from a body long declared dead. She looked up. One cluster of running lights on the old tug had come on. Dim, uneven amber. A manipulator arm unfolded. Then the second. The thrusters fired a short correction burst, rotating the whole machine 15 degrees with a precision too clean to belong to failure. Vance, Rina's voice came over comms at once. Activation on Object 774. Confirm visual. Confirmed, Miro said, all the looseness gone from his voice. Mark IV is live. Arms out. Thrusters active. Fall back and flag. But Ellie was not moving yet. She was watching. The tug reached toward a cluster of nearby debris and made a choice. It ignored 2 structural beams and a serviceable hull plate, then closed its grippers around a radiator panel with careful precision. Not random, not panicked, selective. It's choosing, Ellie said. Miro had already started pulling her toward the bot. What? It skipped the beams. It skipped the plate. It went for thermal hardware. Ellie watched the tug rotate toward a ferrite screen fragment. And now shielding. Arthur's voice sharpened. Do not fall in love with a pattern, Miss Thorne. Old autonomous systems can make failure look intentional. A failure does not select for heat management. The tug kept working. It drew in the radiator panel, then 2 ferrite screen sections, then a cluster of memory modules from a split archive crate, then an aging energy cell, then a heat exchanger. Each selection deliberate, each placement measured around a point Ellie still could not see clearly. Miro swung the bot toward them and hauled her inside. Through the canopy, Ellie watched the assembly growing in the dark. Thermal control, she murmured, almost to herself. Shielding, power, buffers, heat exchange. Her fingers began sketching invisible geometry in the air. Arthur, that is not armor. Arthur was silent for a beat too long. No, he said at last. Armor would be uglier. It's building conditions. Consistent with that interpretation, Arthur said. Not proof. Rina cut back in. Vance, Thorne, I need markers on that object before it grows any farther. In and out. Miro looked at Ellie through his visor. You heard her. We tag and leave. The bot's thrusters fired. The graveyard swung around them in slow, terrible silence while the growing structure loomed ahead. Asymmetrical, improvised, increasingly purposeful. They were 50 meters out when the tug reoriented a ferrite panel. Not at them. Ellie understood that instantly, and too late. It was not an attack. It was a correction, one that happened to send a heavy fragment into the bot's path with the lazy authority of moving mass in vacuum. Miro swore and kicked the bot sideways. The fragment clipped the external tool rack with a hammering jolt. The cabin lurched. Ellie's harness locked and her left clip failed. One moment, Ellie was in her seat. The next, Ellie was half outside the open frame, held by one tether and whatever purchase her boots could find on a strut that had never been meant as a foothold. The graveyard rolled around her. Stars, wreckage, the faint chain of colony lights far below, the black shape of the growing cocoon turning against them all. Thorne, Miro snapped. Hold position! But the bot was correcting. The fragment was still tumbling through their wake, and the geometry was already turning her tether into a problem. Ellie did the only thing training and instinct agreed on. Ellie jumped. Her magnetic boots hit the spinning edge of a radiator panel with a clank she felt through her skeleton. The panel rotated. Ellie rotated with it. One glove locked on a cable run, one tether stretched taut and singing through the frame. Her shoulder hit a crossbeam hard enough to send pain bright and clean down her arm. She set it aside for later. From there, clinging to the outer skin of what the tug was building, slowly turning against the stars, Ellie saw what nobody in the command module could. The structure was not chaos. Up close, it was rough, desperate architecture. Radiator panels angled to reject heat in specific vectors. Ferrite sections overlapped with intent, not chance. Buffer modules and power cells were mounted inward, all of them feeding toward a center hidden by the shell's uneven geometry. Ellie could feel the argument of the design before she could see its conclusion. Her link pad brushed an ancient junction port, corroded but alive. Data trickled through. Ellie pulled the device close, captured a fragment of active log, and felt the blood drain from her face. "Miro," Ellie said, very clearly. "Get me in." Miro already had the bot moving, keeping just enough clearance to avoid adding his own wreck to the sector inventory. The tether reel drew Ellie back by increments. Ellie crossed hand over hand, climbed through the frame, and dropped into her seat with fingers that were steady only because she insisted on it. On the open channel, the orbital dispatcher's voice began reading numbers, drift projections, mass growth, window to corridor intersection. A calm voice, neutral and precise, the sound of a system that had already done the math and did not care who listened. "Neutralization protocol is active," Rina said. "Drones are being tasked. The object gets disassembled before it reaches the shuttle corridor." Ellie looked at the fragment on her screen. "Rina," Ellie said, "I pulled a live protocol line from the tug's external port." "What line?" Ellie read it aloud. "Maintain passenger viability until transfer." The words hung in the channel. Arthur drew a breath he did not need. Miro's hands stopped on the controls. Even Rina said nothing for 3 full seconds. "Passenger," Ellie said. "It's not building a weapon. It's not self-repair. It's trying to keep something alive." Outside the canopy, the old tug continued its work, selecting, placing, assembling, and the cocoon pulsed faintly with thermal exchange. One radiator darkened as another brightened, like the slow, stubborn heartbeat of something refusing to die simply because the registry had already made room for its absence. Chapter 2. The door slams shut. The channel held the kind of silence that meant someone was deciding how much patience to waste. Ellie pressed her thumb along the edge of the link pad and waited. "You are asking me," Rina said at last, "to delay a live neutralization because an obsolete tug running a corrupted loop produced one line of pre-colonial protocol?" "The directive is active," Ellie said. "Not archived. Active. And the tug's behavior matches it." "Behavior is not evidence." "Then give me one pass to collect evidence." Rina's reply came without heat. "No. If there is something valuable in that shell, it can be evaluated after the object is safe." "And if there's something alive in it?" "Alive is a category for after we control the mass, not before." The channel closed with professional finality. Arthur said nothing. His hologram, faint beside the panel, wore the look of a lecturer allowing a student to meet the consequences of her own argument. Outside the canopy, the graveyard drifted in ordered ruin. Far below, the shuttle corridor traced a clean, luminous arc against the dark. Ellie turned to Miro. Miro was checking a maneuvering thruster housing, hands moving with the mechanical thoroughness of habit. "You heard Cade. I need one more pass. You also need to stop saying that like repetition changes jurisdiction." Ellie leaned forward. "If we do not identify the central object before the cutters reach it, the whole disassembly is a guess. A bad guess with an active tug in the loop could throw fragments exactly where Rina is trying to protect." Miro stopped working and looked at her properly. "That is a safety argument," Miro said. "It is. And not just a curiosity argument. It can be both." Arthur murmured, "Miss Thorne, one does admire the honesty with which you attempt to smuggle obsession inside procedure." Ellie ignored him. 15 minutes. Miro considered the growing cocoon beyond the glass. One pass, 15 minutes. If the tug twitches wrong, I drag us out by the tether. When they came back in, the structure had changed. The tug had drawn the outer shell tighter, locking panel edges together with scavenged clamps and cable runs. The whole thing had pulled inward like a fist closing around something fragile. Through unfinished gaps in the shell, Ellie saw the center at last. A sarcophagus. Long, dense, and unmistakably old. One side blackened by raw solar exposure. Markings survived only in fragments, radiation-bitten labels, warning glyphs reduced to pale ghosts, a serial prefix stamped deep enough to outlast paint. "You see that?" Ellie asked. "I see it," Miro said. "Passenger class hull geometry, but the wrong dimensions. Too narrow for standard cryo, too heavy for cargo." Arthur flickered into sharper resolution. "Too dense for a biological capsule, but the surface plating suggests a controlled environment, perhaps a computational one." "Meaning?" Arthur sighed. "A brain in a box, if one insists on being vulgar." The possibility landed between them. For one brief, dangerous second, a simpler theory offered itself. A human passenger. A lost explorer. An ancient cryo unit written off into the graveyard and forgotten. Ellie did not trust simplicity here. The markings supported and undermined the idea at once. Some tags implied environmental protection. Others specified tolerances too narrow for ordinary biology. Thermal bands, radiation thresholds, error correction notices embedded where no medical capsule would need them. "I'm going for the external hatch," Ellie said. "Thorne." "Clock's running." Ellie crossed on the tether line, boots clamping onto the outer shell. Up close, the tug's work looked even rougher. Cables twisted at ugly angles, energy cells wedged into place by necessity rather than elegance. Hardware cannibalized from objects that had once served entirely different purposes. Frost glazed the shadow side. Heat pressed through the sunlit side. The whole shell felt like emergency architecture built by a machine too stubborn to quit. Ellie found the hatch 12 meters in. Old standard, manual release. Mechanical latches designed to work after every intelligent system aboard had already failed. Arthur walked Ellie through the sequence from memory, every instruction delivered with the offended precision of a man who had once trusted people to keep better documentation. The mechanism gave. The first seal broke with a faint metallic exhale. For one breath, the interior opened. Dense shadow, thick cable bundles, the glint of old housings, and far inside, the smallest struggling diagnostic light trying to remember how to be a light. Then the door slammed shut, not slowly, not reluctantly. Inner seals crashed together with a force Ellie felt through boots, gloves, bones. A second lock sequence engaged behind the first, deeper, heavier, clearly not meant for human convenience. The interior vanished. Arthur's voice flattened. "Contamination protocol. The system read your access as an intrusion." "Contamination?" Miro said over comms. "Then there's atmosphere in there?" "No," Arthur said. "Not atmosphere. Stability." That one word changed the shape of the scene. Arthur's hologram sharpened as his mind caught up with the architecture. This lockout is not protecting air for a body. It is protecting conditions for a process: temperature, field noise, timing integrity. The sarcophagus sealed itself as a computation chamber. Miro heard danger in that. Ellie heard value. "If the front access sealed," Ellie said, laying a gloved hand on the cold hatch, "there has to be a maintenance path." "There does," Arthur said at once, now fully engaged. "Thermal exchange conduit below the heatsink array. Too narrow for proper EVA. Meant for service drones or idiots. Conveniently, we have both options available." Ellie was already moving. Her link pad pulled a thermal map from the shell, and there it was. A thin line of warmth where the hull should have been dark. A hidden service seam. "Cade to Vance," Rina said into the open channel. "Confirm your trainee is clear. Cutters go live in 4 minutes." Miro's answer came tight. "Working on it." Ellie dropped below the sealed hatch and forced open a narrow outer panel. The passage beyond was barely generous enough for a human body in a light suit. She squeezed in between old thermal lines and the sarcophagus wall, scraping both elbows at once. The conduit twisted and narrowed. Her suit snagged on unseen brackets. Somewhere behind her, Miro reeled out tether, with the careful pace of a man aware he might be pulling back a body instead of a person. Then the first drone cutter fired. Vacuum carried no sound, but the structure translated the event beautifully. Metal shuddered. A support piece parted somewhere above. The shock ran through the cocoon, into the conduit, into Ellie's shoulder in a bright crack of pain. The link pad struck a pipe. Arthur's projection dissolved into static for 1 terrifying second. Then he reformed, pixelated, furious. "They're cutting the wrong side of the load path," Arthur snapped. "One more support like that, and this conduit folds on you." The tether went taut. 60 seconds, Thorne," Miro said. The strain in his voice had lost all pretense of annoyance and become fear-wearing work language. 60. Then I pull you whether you're ready or not." Ellie forced herself forward the last half-meter. The probe on the link pad found the diagnostic bus, old, dirty, still faintly alive. Data came in broken pulses. Arthur caught the format and translated on the fly. It was not cargo data. It was not a patient file. It was not a dead machine's maintenance archive. It was memory, stretched thin across decades, patched and repatched by non-stop error correction. Thermal regulation tables, damage logs, identity preservation routines running against cumulative decay. A hybrid signature Ellie recognized from theory and had never expected to meet in the field. Early generation consciousness architecture, built before anyone had drawn a clear legal line between infrastructure and personhood. No biological passenger, no ancient sleeper, a mind. A mind bound to its own physical body so completely it could not be copied out without destroying what made it itself. Arthur stared at the data in silence. When he spoke, the teacher and the cynic were both gone. "It is not a program," Arthur said softly. "It is a consciousness sustaining itself in a failing environment." The second drone cut. The cocoon groaned. Miro hauled on the tether. And Ellie understood, finally, what Rina's sector was about to dismantle. Not junk, not malfunction, not a curiosity worthy of a footnote, but a passenger still waiting for a transfer no one had ever come to complete. Chapter 3. The Hope That Makes Everything Worse. Once the pieces locked together, the story became impossible not to see. Ellie hung in the service bot with one tether clip still attached to her harness and watched the data arrange itself into a structure more damning than any single revelation. The ancient directive, the sarcophagus, the Mark IV's impossible patience. It ceased being mystery and became biography. An early colonial supervisory intelligence, one of the first generation, heavy, conservative, physically rooted. Built to run atmospheric balance, water cycling, distribution, environmental stability, the machinery of collective survival. Back when settlements were still learning how to breathe without Earth. Back when engineers solved uncertainty by making systems harder to kill than the people who used them. And then newer architectures came. Portable mines, distributed systems, cleaner law, at least on paper. At some point, somebody had needed to decide what the old intelligence was. Person? Tool? Legacy infrastructure? Retirement was easy for humans. Replacement was easy for machines. This thing had lived in the seam between those categories, so the seam had swallowed it. No formal termination, no ethical review, no public controversy, just reclassification. Obsolete node, decommissioned carrier, disposal authorized. Seal the mind in a sarcophagus, write it into the graveyard registry, and let bureaucracy do what courage would not. Something later cracked the old shell. Impact, thermal stress, accumulated damage, the slow arithmetic of neglect, and the tug had woken to its last instruction. Maintain passenger viability until transfer. "Arthur," Ellie said, "I can prove this." That belief arrived in her with dangerous speed. If Ellie could give Rina clear continuity, memory, self-reference, awareness, not fragments but coherence, Rina would have to stop. Maybe not because Rina was sentimental, because destroying a confirmed consciousness without review was the kind of liability no shift chief wanted attached to her name. Miro glanced sideways from the controls. "You've got something." "If I can clean the signal from the core, yes." Ellie looked at the display. "Enough that she can't not ignore it." "Can't not," Miro repeated. The crack in the plan opened there. Because the signal was terrible. Ellie pulled the latest stream back up. Timestamps drifted. Memory clusters collapsed into damaged zones. Identity structures showed through the noise, but only if you already knew how to look. To anyone less invested, it would read as a degraded system producing complex artifacts. Arthur appeared beside the panel, projection unusually crisp. "In this state, it proves nothing to a hostile reader. Rina will call it meaningful noise. At best, grounds to archive before demolition." "I need a cleaner channel." "You need a living translator." Arthur looked at the sarcophagus trace. "The core thinks in a language 70 years dead. Your link pad can bridge it if you open the full processing envelope." Ellie understood before Arthur finished. The full processing envelope meant the network would see what actually lived inside the link pad. Arthur, not a polite assistant layer, not a tuned expert system, a personality structure, unauthorized. "Specifically mine," Arthur said. The cabin went still. "There's another option," Ellie said, though she hated it even while saying it. "I send what we have. Rina logs it, the drones finish." "Yes," Arthur said. "That is another option." The silence that followed was not indecision. It was recognition. Ellie and Arthur were both now looking at the same moral architecture from different sides. Save one hidden mind by exposing another, or protect the one already with her and let the other be shredded under protocol. "If I'm wrong," Ellie said, "I expose you for static." "Yes." "And if I'm right?" Static crawled briefly along Arthur's tweed jacket. When he spoke again, the old lecture hall resonance had returned, stripped of irony. "If you are right, Miss Thorne, then there are two persons in this sector currently surviving by administrative oversight and good camouflage. I would rather not preserve myself by watching the other one dismantled." Arthur set down the imaginary coffee cup. "Open the bridge." Ellie did. She pressed the link pad against the diagnostic bus and rerouted every layer she dared touch. Arthur stretched his architecture across the translation gap, making himself a grammar between two incompatible ages of machine thought. The device trembled in her hands, not mechanical vibration, but processing load. Three forms of cognition brushing against one another's edges. Miro saw the spike at once. "Thorne, your pad's pulling power like a docking spindle." "What are you doing?" "Talking." To what? The answer arrived before Ellie could give one. The passenger responded, not with words at first, with structure, a map of self. Calm, spare, unhurried. Memory spanning decades, each layer time-stamped, each transition cleaner than the damaged medium had any right to allow. Error correction routines running constantly, not repairing function, but preserving identity. Awareness of location, awareness of elapsed time, awareness that transfer remained listed as active in a queue no one had checked since before Ellie was born. The passenger knew it had not been transferred. The passenger knew it was waiting. Not asleep, not shut down. Waiting, consciously, patiently, with nothing to do but hold itself together and trust an instruction no one had come to honor. Arthur's hologram went completely still. "It's someone," Arthur said. That was all. Ellie assembled the evidence in under 4 minutes. Identity maps, continuity markers, self-observation loops, historical linkage to the first-generation colony systems, a technical explanation of the tug's behavior that reclassified the whole event from malfunction to emergency care. She transmitted the packet to Rina. 30 seconds of dead air. Miro checked the message state. "She's reading." "She'll have to stop," Ellie said, and heard the hope in her own voice. Thin, bright, already fragile. Rina's answer came back in her flattest operational tone. "Thorne, submission received. Material is flagged for administrative assessment following completion of neutralization." Ellie stared. "Following?" "I am eliminating an orbital threat and preserving recoverable data. The corridor timeline has not changed. The drift has not changed. Your discovery may be significant. It is still downstream of physics. You're going to destroy it and review it later? I'm going to keep the corridor clear. The corridor does not care what the object means." There was no contempt in Rina's voice. That made it worse. In the background, Ellie could hear the dispatcher reading numbers to somebody else. Mass, drift, window, calm as weather. Then Rina closed the channel. Ellie sat very still. That was the moment she understood what truth could fail to do. The passenger could be everything Ellie claimed, continuous, aware, irreplaceable, and still lose, because the system was not built to weigh personhood against orbital mechanics in real time. Truth had entered the room and found procedure already seated. Arthur broke the silence with care. "Miss Thorne, we have a second problem." Ellie turned. Arthur's projection was flickering, not gently, but with the hard stutter of outside scrutiny. The bridge left a trace. Colonial Compliance tagged the processing profile in your link pad. It has noticed a non-standard personality structure. Ellie tightened her grip on the device. "Mine," Arthur said. A new warning bloomed on the screen. "Device flagged for compliance review. Unauthorized cognitive structure detected. Pending classification." "They cannot." "They can," Arthur said. The old dryness was there, but so was something raw beneath it. "You tried to save one hidden mind and accidentally introduced another." Outside, a drone drove a grapple into the cocoon's outer frame. The whole structure gave a metallic shudder and began to rotate, slowly at first, then with the sickening inevitability of bad mass distribution asserting itself. "Thorne," Miro snapped. "The shell's going unstable. Cade wants us clear. Now." Through the bridge, Ellie could still feel the passenger, calm, coherent, almost impossibly steady in the center of a failing environment. Beside that presence, Arthur flickered in her hand. Two minds, one discovered, one exposed, both now under the eye of a system that knew how to catalog but not how to care. Miro yanked the tether. Ellie slammed backward through the conduit, scraping suit and shoulder against old metal. She came free of the last bracket just as the cocoon completed a heavier turn. Miro reeled her into the bot and sealed the frame. Outside, the structure spun in the dark, ugly, improvised, stubbornly alive, while the drones moved into position with the patient certainty of machines that had never once needed to ask whether the thing being dismantled mattered. 90 seconds, Miro said. That's what Cade is giving us to clear before full disassembly. 90 seconds, and Ellie, 18 years old, holding a device with 2 lives inside it, understood the shape of her failure. She had not saved the passenger. She had only proved the passenger deserved saving. The system's answer had been to add Arthur to the list. Being right, it turned out, protected nothing. It only made blindness impossible. Chapter 4: Passenger Accepted. Rina's voice came through the comm with the weight of a door swinging toward its frame. Vance, bring your trainee in. Drones are entering final phase. I want you clear in 60 seconds. Outside the canopy, 3 drones converged on the spinning shell, cutters warming to a dull orange. The cocoon turned against the stars, panels flashing in and out of light, cables tightening and relaxing with each revolution, and at its center, buried under scavenged metal and unfinished necessity, the passenger waited for a transfer that was about to become a killing. Ellie opened the channel. Rina, if your drones finish this cut, you are not dismantling a dangerous object. You are killing a person. I read your data, Thorne. Then you know what's inside. I know what may be inside, Rina said. I also know exactly where that mass is drifting. I am not arguing consciousness with you. I am telling you the orbit will not negotiate. The line stayed open just long enough for Ellie to hear the dispatcher continuing the count in the background. Then Rina closed it. No more appeals. No more hope that correct words could substitute for changed conditions. Miro watched Ellie with the stillness of a man waiting to see whether the next move would save a load or drop it. We're out of rhetoric, Ellie said. Yeah. I need one more link to the core. Miro did not ask why. Miro simply held the bot steady against the slow rotation and let Ellie press the link pad back to the contact point. Arthur dimmed his projection to conserve every cycle he could spare and reopened the bridge. Ellie waited for panic. She expected fear, pleading, some digital analog of "do not let them do this." What came instead was calm. Orbital risk confirmed. Colony safety priority. Recommends self-termination. Ellie read the line twice before it became real. The passenger, the mind that had held itself together in silence for decades, abandoned in the graveyard, sustained by a tug scavenging shelter from the dead, had assessed the danger and chosen the colony over itself. Not because a script demanded it, because it understood value beyond survival. Arthur's voice dropped into the register reserved for truths too large for wit. There, Arthur said softly. There is your proof. Not continuity, not memory, choice. The whole story tilted. Ellie stopped trying to win the argument. Ellie started solving the problem. Not the moral problem, the physical one. The cocoon was dangerous, yes, but not because the passenger existed, not because the tug had malfunctioned. It was dangerous because the emergency shell was unfinished. Too much mass sat on the wrong edge. Too many temporary connections still defined the load path. The structure was drifting because the tug had been improvising under scarcity and had run out of time before it reached minimum stability. If someone finished the shell, rebalanced the mass, closed the thermal loop, and jettisoned the excess frame, the object would stop being unpredictable. A stable object could be moved. A stable object could be pushed to the high dead orbit Arthur had mentioned, the quiet inclination above the graveyard and clear of the shuttle corridor. The protocol existed to destroy threats. Remove the threat, and the protocol lost its teeth. Arthur, Ellie said. The old transfer routine. Does the tug have a target orbit? Arthur brightened immediately. Yes, high dead orbit, separate inclination. The tug was always meant to move the sarcophagus there once the protection shell reached threshold. Can we reach threshold? Arthur's mind was already racing ahead. If the shell is corrected, rotate the radiators into proper rejection, close the ferrite gap, shift the air correction buffer inward, drop the outer frame mass. Can the tug do it? Not in time. Ellie reached for her helmet. Then we do it by hand. She reopened the channel to Rina. Cade, your drones are making the situation worse. Silence. Then, explain quickly. Each cut is destabilizing the frame. Keep cutting and you trade a controlled object for a debris field. Ellie spoke at the speed of thought, finally aligned with action. Give me 90 seconds. I can stabilize the shell, reduce mass, and push the whole module to high dead orbit. Corridor goes clear. No fragmentation. Dead air. Then Rina. If you fail, I finish the disassembly. If I fail, you were going to do that anyway. Another pause. Ellie could hear Rina thinking in numbers. 90 seconds, Rina said. Not 91. Vance, keep her alive. Miro answered instantly. Copy. No gratitude, no triumph. Just an opening. Miro took the bot in deeper, threading it through spinning panel edges and slack cable arcs with the practiced insanity of a man who had spent too long flying in places that wanted him dead. The cockpit shuddered once as he corrected around a drifting brace. You've got a platform, Miro said. Tell me where. Ellie went out on the tether. The cocoon turned beneath her, rough, inelegant, half-built from scavenged parts and machine loyalty. Up close, it looked less like a structure than a storm held together by purpose. Cable instead of bolts. Clamps where engineered joints should have been. Improvised geometry everywhere. And under all of it, a thermal pulse from the sarcophagus, still there, still steady. Arthur fed instructions into her ear in a rapid stream of old service architecture and new motion. Radiator at your 2 o'clock. Rotate 40 degrees counterclockwise. That closes the primary rejection path. Ellie grabbed the frozen edge, broke the ice bond with her boot, and forced the panel through resistance until the magnetic clamp snapped home. Ferrite section below you. Pull it across and lock it to the port strut. Ellie dropped, caught the screen, and hauled it into place with both arms and most of her body. Her injured shoulder flared white-hot. She ignored it. A drone hovered 20 meters off, cutters warm, waiting out Rina's window. 60 seconds, Miro said. Buffer module left side. Single cable mount. Disconnect and bring it inboard. Ellie pushed off, caught the module by its handle, unhooked the line, and guided the rectangular unit toward the hull port Arthur was calling out. The connector fought her. Ellie hit it with the heel of her glove until the contact seated and a green diagnostic light blinked alive. Small, almost ridiculous, and perfect. 40. Outer frame releases, port and starboard. Arthur? Arthur rattled off a sequence of old codes. Ellie drove them through the link pad and into the tug across the bridge. For one horrible second, nothing happened. Then both release charges fired. 2 ugly links of excess frame detached and drifted away, tumbling into the sector. The cocoon lurched, shed weight, and steadied slightly. 25, Miro said. Arthur, transfer routine. Arthur's hologram flared brighter than Ellie had ever seen it, every spare cycle committed to the task. The old command flowed through the bridge into the Mark IV. The tug responded. Its thrusters fired, not in the improvised bursts Ellie had watched all day, but in a clean, disciplined sequence. The kind of burn a machine performs when it finally understands it has permission to finish the job it was built for. The cocoon shifted. Residual spin fought the maneuver for half a breath, then yielded. The whole assembly began to move upward and outward, away from the graveyard belt, away from the corridor, toward the high dead orbit where nothing scheduled or fragile would pass close enough to care. Ellie scrambled backward across the hull as the frame pulled away beneath her. Miro brought the bot in on a knife-edge approach, and Ellie caught the tow ring and swung inside with seconds to spare. Behind the canopy, the cocoon climbed. The drones held position, cutters cooling, suddenly reduced to witnesses. "Dispatch," Rina said. "Confirm trajectory on A13. The dispatcher answered with the same calm voice that had counted down its death. "Object A13 on stable transfer vector. Corridor envelope clear. Threat neutralized." The channel went silent long enough for recalculation. Then Rina spoke. "Neutralization protocol suspended. Thorne, your object is out of my corridor. Keep it that way." "Understood," Ellie said. The cocoon grew smaller against the black, climbing toward cleaner space. The tug corrected with short, steady pulses, carrying its passenger toward the orbit it had always been meant to reach. Ellie opened the registry. The old line still sat there. A13. Decommissioned computational carrier. Disposal authorized. Ellie deleted it. Then Ellie entered the new designation with hands that no longer shook. A13. Autonomous Inhabited Computational Module. Status: Passenger. She submitted the revision and watched it propagate through the network, one changed line in a vast archive, shifting a boundary the system had once found convenient to blur. Through the fading bridge, Ellie felt the last trace of the passenger, calm, coherent, moving away into the silence with decades of patience intact. Miro exhaled for what felt like the first time since the first drone cut. "So," Miro said, leaning back against the flight panel, "that's what an academy placement looks like." Arthur reappeared between them, tweed restored, imaginary coffee cup back where it belonged. He looked like a man deeply irritated to have had his worldview corrected by events. "Congratulations, Miss Thorne," Arthur said. "You have just staged the first recorded mutiny by a life support system against an inventory ledger." Ellie watched the cocoon diminish into the high dark. Out there, nothing blinked between it and the stars. No sector tags, no salvage priorities, no waiting cutters. The silence around it did not celebrate. It simply made room. Passenger accepted.